The history of monarchies often shines its brightest spotlight on kings and queens who sit on thrones, command armies, and sign treaties. Yet, beneath the grand narratives of crowns and kingdoms lies a subtler, more intricate story, one woven by the hands of royal women whose influence, though less visible, was no less powerful. Among these figures, the Stuart sisters stand out as enigmatic architects of their dynasty's fate. Their lives, marked by diplomacy, faith, resilience, and cultural patronage, reveal a hidden world of power where whispers carried weight, and soft influence could change the course of nations. Exploring their legacy not only uncovers forgotten chapters of history, but also reshapes how we understand female authority in an era dominated by men. The Stuart dynasty, one of the most fascinating and turbulent royal houses in British history, ruled over Scotland from the late 14th century and later extended its reign to England and Ireland in the early 17th century. From James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, to Queen Anne, the Stuarts presided over an era marked by civil war, religious upheaval, revolution, and eventually, the union of the English and Scottish crowns. While kings and male heirs have often dominated the historical spotlight, figures like Charles I, who was executed, and James II, who was deposed, the story of the Stuart dynasty is incomplete without acknowledging the powerful and often hidden influence of the royal women who shaped events from the periphery. Among these women were the so-called Stuart sisters, a term that refers not only to literal sisters of Stuart kings and queens, but also to a wider circle of female relatives within the dynasty, half-sisters, stepsisters, daughters, cousins, and even in-laws who became key players on the political and cultural chessboard of Europe. These women were not always the ones crowned or celebrated, but they often held great sway in courts, parliaments, and churches. They formed marriages that realigned international alliances, mediated in conflicts that could have sparked wars, and acted as advisors, confidants, and patrons of the arts and religion. They often worked in the background, operating in a world where public authority for women was severely limited, but their impact was undeniable. The phrase hidden influence captures the nature of their contributions. Unlike their male counterparts, Stuart women rarely held formal positions of power. They were queens consort rather than queens regnant, princesses with lineage but without sovereignty, noble women with access but not authority. Yet within these limitations, they carved out spheres of influence that rivaled those of men. Through correspondence, courtly influence, religious patronage, and carefully orchestrated marriages, they subtly but effectively shaped the course of Stuart and European history. Whether it was acting as intermediaries during diplomatic crises, securing dynastic claims through strategic unions, or preserving religious and cultural legacies, the Stuart sisters were central to the life and survival of the dynasty. Take, for instance, Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of James VI and I. Her marriage to Frederick V of the Palatinate placed her at the heart of the 30 Years' War and positioned her descendants as future monarchs of Great Britain through the Hanoverian line. Or consider Henrietta Maria, wife of Charles I, who, though French and Catholic in a Protestant kingdom, influenced her husband's court culturally and religiously, provoking admiration and fierce opposition alike. Her daughter, Henrietta, and often called Minette, later became a vital political link between the English and French courts during times of tension. These women weren't just passive participants in dynastic politics. They were strategists, networkers, and cultural icons. Why, then, have their stories remained so obscured in the grand narratives of the Stuart period? Part of the reason lies in the gender norms of the time. Women were often excluded from political office, education, and historical documentation. Even when they were active players in events, their roles were downplayed, dismissed, or overshadowed by the deeds and misdeeds of their male relatives. The chroniclers of the day, mostly male, focused on kings and wars, parliaments and battles, leaving behind a skewed version of history that has persisted for centuries. Another reason is that much of the influence these women wielded was informal. They were influential not because of official titles or decrees, but because of personal relationships, networks, and private persuasion. Their contributions often took place in the private chambers of monarchs, in secret letters, in salons and chapels, not in public speeches or military commands. This type of influence is harder to trace and quantify, but no less significant. Uncovering these roles is not simply an exercise in filling historical gaps. It is essential to understanding the complexity of power and legacy in the Stuart age. By examining the actions and experiences of these women, we gain a more nuanced and truthful picture of the period. We begin to see how dynasties survived or crumbled not just because of kings and armies, but because of marriages arranged by queens, religious policies pushed by consorts, and international diplomacy conducted behind closed doors by royal sisters. In our modern context, where gender equity and representation are central to how we think about history and politics, revisiting the lives of the Stuart sisters offers a form of justice to those who were written out of the narrative. It allows us to challenge traditional definitions of power and recognize that influence does not always wear a crown or carry a scepter. It may whisper in the king's ear, comfort him in defeat, negotiate quietly across borders, or foster the next generation of rulers. It may take the form of letters, alliances, patronage, or faith, but it is power nonetheless. The story of the Stuart sisters is, therefore, not a side note in the history of the dynasty. It is a central theme that demands attention. From the shadowy corridors of exiled courts to the glittering halls of continental palaces, their lives tell a story of resilience, intelligence, and strategic agency. They were not passive observers of history, but active participants, often forced to work within the boundaries imposed by their gender and status, but nevertheless finding ways to shape their world. In tracing their lives, this video seeks to restore their rightful place in history, illuminating the vital roles they played in shaping the destiny of the British Isles and the wider European theater. By lifting the veil on their hidden influence, we gain not only a fuller understanding of the Stuart dynasty, but also a deeper appreciation of how power operated in the early modern world, not just in public, but in private, not just by men, but by women whose voices, though long ignored, still echo through the ages. The Stuart dynasty, which would one day rule over a unified Great Britain, had its origins deeply rooted in medieval Scotland. The foundation of this powerful line can be traced back to the 14th century with the ascension of Robert II, who became King of Scots in 1371. He was the grandson of Robert the Bruce, the legendary Scottish king who had secured Scotland's independence from England. The Stuart name itself, originally spelled Stuart, came from the hereditary office of High Steward of Scotland, which had been held by Robert II's father, Walter Stuart. When Robert II took the throne, he inaugurated a royal lineage that would not only rule Scotland but eventually extend its reach to England and Ireland, forming the Stuart dynasty that would dominate British politics for centuries. Yet the rise of the Stuart line was not solely a tale of kings and battles. Behind the throne, shaping its course and future, were women whose roles, though often unheralded in traditional histories, were pivotal to the dynasty's early development. These women navigated a complex landscape of political alliances, religious expectations, and dynastic strategy, using the limited means available to them to wield influence and secure power for their families. One of the most significant early female figures in the Stuart line was Marjorie Bruce, the daughter of Robert the Bruce. Her role in the creation of the Stuart dynasty is foundational. Marjorie was married to Walter Stuart, the 6th High Steward of Scotland, and their union was a strategic alliance designed to consolidate the Bruce family's power and secure loyalty among key Scottish nobles. Their son, Robert II, would become the first Stuart king, uniting the bloodlines of the Bruces and the Stuarts and legitimizing a new royal house. Though Marjorie died young, likely from injuries sustained in a riding accident, her legacy lived on through her son and through the political legitimacy her lineage bestowed upon the new dynasty. Marjorie's significance lies not in any recorded political acts or courtly intrigues, but in the dynastic weight she carried. In the medieval period, noble women were often the vessels through which political alliances were cemented. Their value was not only measured in their ability to bear heirs, but also in their lineage and the loyalties they could bring into a marriage. Marjorie was the daughter of a national hero and a symbol of Scottish independence. Her marriage was a bridge between families that shaped the nation's future. Another early figure who exemplifies the role of Stuart women in diplomacy and international affairs is Margaret Stuart, Queen of Norway. She was the daughter of Alexander III of Scotland and married King Eric II of Norway in 1281. Though she belonged to the generation just before the formal beginning of the Stuart dynasty, her story is deeply tied to the Stuart narrative because of the political precedent she set. Through her marriage, she became a conduit between Scotland and the Nordic kingdoms, illustrating how royal women were used to forge international alliances that could ensure peace or provide support in times of conflict. Margaret's union with the Norwegian king was part of a broader strategy to strengthen Scotland's ties with Northern Europe and to counterbalance English influence. Her daughter, Margaret, known as the Maid of Norway, became heir to the Scottish throne after the death of her grandfather, Alexander III. The Maid of Norway's premature death on her voyage to Scotland would plunge the nation into a succession crisis, indirectly paving the way for the rise of the Bruces and later the Stuarts. Thus, the legacy of Margaret Stuart, Queen of Norway, extended far beyond her lifetime. Her marriage had implications that reverberated through Scottish history, underscoring how the fates of nations could hinge on the lives of royal women. In these early generations, the roles of royal women were often shaped by two major forces: religious piety and the system of arranged marriages. Both were fundamental to the social and political fabric of the time, and women were expected to conform to these roles while also navigating their own survival and influence. Religious devotion was not just a personal practice, but a political tool. Noble and royal women were often celebrated for their piety, and their association with the church provided them with a form of soft power. Patronage of religious institutions, sponsorship of monastic communities, and the foundation of chapels and churches were ways through which women could express agency. These acts also elevated their family status, forged alliances with ecclesiastical authorities, and sometimes provided a haven of independence away from the courts. For example, many Stuart women were noted for their religious observance and their roles in supporting the church. This often included ensuring that their children were raised with proper religious instruction, sponsoring clerical careers for relatives, and maintaining religious traditions at court. Religion gave women a sanctioned domain in which to exert influence, both within the family and in the broader political realm. It also provided a language through which they could legitimize their actions. A woman's reputation for holiness could endear her to both the church and the public, buffering her from criticism and enhancing her political utility. At the same time, arranged marriages were the cornerstone of dynastic policy, and royal women were key participants in these strategies. Marriages were almost never matters of personal affection. Instead, they were meticulously planned events with far-reaching political consequences. A well-arranged marriage could secure peace between rival factions, bring foreign wealth or military aid, or help to secure a claim to a contested throne. Royal women, especially in the Stuart context, became pawns and players in this game of dynastic chess. Their personal desires were secondary to the political goals of their fathers and brothers. Yet within these constraints, many found ways to assert themselves. Some developed strong partnerships with their husbands and became influential queens consort. Others used their new positions in foreign courts to promote their native country's interests. Still others turned the courtly customs of marriage and motherhood into tools of diplomacy, cultivating networks of influence that extended beyond their husband's power. Marriage also created transnational ties that would later be crucial for the Stuart claim to the English throne. As the Stuarts expanded their web of alliances, these connections made them more formidable candidates for succession. By the time James VI of Scotland inherited the English throne in 1603, uniting the crowns, the groundwork had been laid by generations of royal women whose marriages had strengthened the dynasty's international position. The lives of these early Stuart women reveal much about the nature of power and survival in medieval Scotland. They operated within a patriarchal system that limited their formal authority, but they found ways to navigate and even manipulate that system to further their family's ambitions. They were queens, mothers, wives, and daughters, but also patrons, diplomats, and symbols of national identity. Though the records of their personal experiences are often sparse or filtered through the biased lenses of chroniclers and clerics, the impact of their actions is clear in the broader narrative of the Stuart dynasty. Their piety was not merely devotional, it was political. Their marriages were not merely personal, they were foundational. Through their lives and legacies, they helped to establish the Stuart dynasty, not just as a line of kings, but as a ruling house with deep roots in Scottish identity and international diplomacy. Mary, Queen of Scots, remains one of the most captivating figures in European history, a queen who was born to rule but whose reign was marked by tragedy, betrayal, and complex personal and political dynamics. Born in December 1542, Mary Stuart was the only surviving legitimate child of King James V of Scotland and his French wife, Mary of Guise. Just 6 days old when her father died, Mary ascended the throne as an infant, instantly becoming a figure of immense political interest, both within Scotland and across Europe. Mary's early upbringing was significantly influenced by Franco-Scottish politics. Raised in the French court from the age of 5, she was groomed not only as the future Queen of Scots, but also as a French royal consort. Her betrothal and eventual marriage to the Dauphin Francis, heir to the French throne, made her queen consort of France in 1559. During her time in France, Mary received an elite education and was deeply influenced by the elegance, sophistication, and political nuance of the Valois court. This upbringing shaped her character and outlook. She became fluent in multiple languages, skilled in diplomacy, and cultured in both courtly manners and intellectual pursuits. However, her life of privilege in France would contrast sharply with the turbulence she would later face upon returning to rule Scotland. Mary returned to Scotland in 1561, after the death of her young husband Francis II. As a Catholic queen ruling a Protestant country, her position was inherently precarious. The Reformation had gained significant ground in Scotland during her absence, and religious tensions ran high. She sought to govern with a degree of tolerance, attempting to bridge the growing chasm between Catholic and Protestant factions. But her reign would soon be engulfed by factionalism, personal misjudgments, and the ambitions of those who sought power through her or in spite of her. Throughout her life, Mary was surrounded by a circle of women whose roles were far more than ornamental. Her court was filled with ladies-in-waiting, many of whom were chosen not merely for their companionship but for their family connections and political usefulness. These women were confidants, messengers, and often intermediaries between Mary and the nobles of the realm. Their presence was crucial in the day-to-day functioning of the court, and they often wielded subtle but real power behind the scenes. One of the most notable figures among Mary's extended family and female supporters was her half-sister Jean Stuart, the Countess of Argyll. Jean was the illegitimate daughter of King James V, and thus Mary's older half-sister. Despite her illegitimate birth, Jean played an important role in court life. She was married to Archibald Campbell, 5th Earl of Argyll, one of the most powerful noblemen in Scotland. Through this marriage, Jean occupied a significant political position, acting as a bridge between Mary and one of the key Protestant factions. Jean Stuart's position highlights the ways in which familial connections could be used to navigate Scotland's treacherous political terrain. Though she shared royal blood with Mary, she also had to maintain her loyalty to her Protestant husband and his powerful allies. This dual allegiance placed her in a delicate position. Her loyalty to her sister was tested repeatedly, especially as tensions grew between Mary and the Scottish nobility. Nevertheless, Jean's courtly presence and alliance through marriage were instrumental in allowing Mary some degree of influence over the Campbells and their faction, at least in the early years of her reign. Mary's court was also notable for its tight-knit circle of female attendants, many of whom had been with her since her time in France. These women were often collectively referred to as the Four Marys: Mary Seton, Mary Beaton, Mary Fleming, and Mary Livingston, though there were other women of equal influence within her circle. These women served her not only as companions, but also as essential agents in the functioning of court diplomacy. They were trusted with letters, often managed financial affairs, and even acted as emissaries to the nobles and foreign dignitaries. However, loyalty within Mary's inner circle was never guaranteed. The very intimacy of court life bred both fierce devotion and dangerous betrayal. Some of her female attendants remained loyal to her even in her darkest hours, through her imprisonment and eventual execution. Others, swayed by the changing political tides, distanced themselves or even turned against her. These betrayals cut especially deep, as they came not only from political allies but from women Mary had trusted as friends and sisters in courtly life. Perhaps one of the most striking aspects of Mary's reign was the way her relationships with other women, particularly powerful ones, shaped her destiny. Among these, her connection with Queen Elizabeth I of England stands out as both fascinating and tragic. Both women were sovereign rulers in a world dominated by men, and both faced the unique challenges of being female monarchs in the 16th century. But rather than forming a bond over their shared experiences, Mary and Elizabeth became political and ideological rivals. Their relationship was complex and layered. Elizabeth, a Protestant queen ruling over a volatile England, viewed Mary's Catholicism and her claim to the English throne as a direct threat. Mary, as the great-granddaughter of Henry VII, had a legitimate claim through Tudor blood, and many Catholics considered her the rightful Queen of England. At the same time, Mary often sought Elizabeth's recognition and support, particularly in securing her position in Scotland and later in her desperate efforts to gain asylum after being forced to abdicate. Their correspondence, which stretched over years, reflects the mixture of diplomacy, suspicion, envy, and rivalry that characterized their interactions. Elizabeth often treated Mary as both a potential ally and a dangerous adversary. She offered advice and warnings, delayed decisions on Mary's requests, and ultimately kept her imprisoned for nearly 2 decades. Mary, on her part, tried to appeal to their shared womanhood and royal status, sometimes speaking to Elizabeth as a fellow queen, and at other times attempting to outmaneuver her through foreign alliances and secret plots. It is easy to interpret their rivalry purely through the lens of politics, but at its core, it was also deeply personal. Both women understood the stakes of ruling as women in a patriarchal society. Both faced pressure to marry and produce heirs, and both had to navigate a court filled with ambitious men who sought to control or undermine them. The irony of their lives lies in the fact that they never met face to face, despite the massive influence they exerted over each other's fates. Mary's personal life, especially her marriages, further complicated her position and added fuel to the political fires surrounding her. Her first marriage to Francis, too, had been politically advantageous but short-lived. Her second marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was meant to strengthen her claim to the English throne, as Darnley was also a descendant of the Tudor line. However, their union quickly turned sour, marred by Darnley's arrogance, infidelity, and involvement in the murder of Mary's secretary, David Rizzio. Darnley himself was later murdered under suspicious circumstances, and Mary's subsequent marriage to the Earl of Bothwell, widely believed to have orchestrated Darnley's killing, led to a public outcry and her eventual downfall. Mary's political enemies capitalized on her personal missteps, portraying her as reckless, immoral, and unfit to rule. Her gender only amplified these criticisms, as female rulers were expected to maintain higher moral standards than their male counterparts. Her failure to meet these expectations gave her opponents the justification they needed to strip her of power. In 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI, and fled to England, hoping Elizabeth would offer her support. Instead, she was imprisoned. During her long imprisonment in England, Mary continued to write letters, maintain correspondence with Catholic powers in Europe, and conspire, both openly and secretly, to regain her throne. Her female attendants remained by her side, sharing in her suffering, helping to manage her affairs, and witnessing the slow decline of a once powerful queen. Even in confinement, Mary remained politically significant. She was a symbol of Catholic resistance and a potential rallying point for those who opposed Elizabeth. Ultimately, Mary's involvement in plots to assassinate Elizabeth and reclaim the English crown proved fatal. The most infamous of these, the Babington Plot, provided the evidence Elizabeth's ministers needed to press for Mary's execution. In 1587, After years of hesitation, Elizabeth signed the warrant, and Mary was beheaded at Fotheringham Castle. Mary's execution was a landmark moment, not just a political act, but a profound statement about the limits of female power in early modern Europe. It sent a message about what could happen to a woman who defied the established order, who refused to conform to the expectations of submissiveness, and who wielded her beauty, charm, and lineage as tools of sovereignty. Despite her downfall, Mary's legacy would endure. Her son, James VI of Scotland, eventually became James I of England, uniting the crowns of both nations. In this sense, Mary achieved in death what she had been denied in life, the unification of the kingdoms under her bloodline. The women in Mary's life, her half-sister Jean, her loyal attendants, and even her rival Elizabeth, helped shape her story in profound ways. Their relationships were not mere subplots, but central threads in the drama of her life. They illustrate how women, even when constrained by the expectations of the time, could influence politics, dynasties, and the course of history. Mary, Queen of Scots, was never a solitary figure. She lived, ruled, and died surrounded by a network of women whose influence, loyalty, betrayal, and ambition matched that of any court of men. Their stories, intertwined with hers, offer a deeper understanding of the personal and political forces that defined one of history's most fascinating queens. In the annals of English royal history, few figures embody the perils of female inheritance and ambition more poignantly than Arbella Stuart. Born into the shadowy junction of power and peril, Arbella was a woman whose lineage placed her near the throne, but whose gender and independence made her a threat to the realm's stability as perceived by those in power. Her life serves as a haunting study in what it meant to be too close to sovereignty, too intelligent for obedience, and too female to rule in a world shaped by patriarchal fears. Arbella Stuart was born in 1575, the only child of Charles Stuart, Earl of Lennox, and Elizabeth Cavendish. Through her father, she was a direct descendant of Margaret Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII, making her a cousin to Queen Elizabeth I and, more importantly, a legitimate claimant to the English throne. This connection was not just symbolic, it was a potential claim that could be leveraged by political factions, foreign rulers, or rebels dissatisfied with Elizabeth's childless rule. Arbella was therefore not simply a noblewoman with royal blood, she was a dynastic possibility, a pawn in the great game of succession politics, and at times, a queen-in-waiting, at least in the eyes of some. From an early age, Arbella was surrounded by intrigue. Her maternal grandmother, Bess of Hardwicke, one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in Elizabethan England, orchestrated her upbringing with the precision of a seasoned political strategist. Bess understood that her granddaughter's royal blood gave her both opportunity and danger. She arranged for Arbella to be educated to the highest standard, ensuring she was fluent in languages, trained in history and politics, and deeply knowledgeable in classical and religious texts. Arbella grew into a formidable intellectual, sharp, articulate, and deeply aware of her position in the political landscape. This intelligence, though an asset, also made her dangerous. Unlike many women of her station, Arbella did not accept her fate passively. She understood the stakes of royal blood and was willing to advocate for herself in the courts of power. Her correspondence with prominent political figures, including James VI of Scotland, later James I of England, shows a woman capable of navigating the labyrinth of royal diplomacy with skill. Her letters were not merely personal, they were political statements, calculated to present her as a rational, competent, and legitimate alternative to the reigning monarch should a succession crisis emerge. Despite her intelligence and pedigree, Arbella was carefully watched and, often, subtly contained. Elizabeth I, ever wary of potential rivals, never fully embraced Arbella, but neither did she openly move against her. Instead, Arbella lived a life of soft confinement, honored, yes, but always under scrutiny, always in the care of others who ensured she would not become a focal point for dissent or rebellion. Her household at Hardwicke Hall became a gilded cage, one where she was adorned but not empowered, allowed to learn but not. When Elizabeth I died in 1603, James VI of Scotland ascended the English throne as James I, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England. For a brief moment, Arbella's future seemed brighter. As a relative of the new king, she might have expected favor, security, perhaps even a carefully arranged marriage to a continental noble. But James, too, understood the threat she posed. He had fought long and hard to secure the throne, and he had no intention of tolerating potential claimants, especially not women who could be manipulated by foreign powers or ambitious factions. Arbella's greatest act of defiance, and perhaps her most tragic mistake, came when she attempted to assert control over her own destiny through marriage. In 1610, she secretly married William Seymour, himself a descendant of Lady Catherine Grey, another claimant to the throne. This union of two powerful bloodlines was seen by King James as nothing short of political provocation. Arbella and William, both with strong claims to the Tudor legacy, represented a potential rallying point for opposition. Though their marriage may have been born of love or mutual desperation, it was interpreted as a dynastic conspiracy. The consequences were swift and severe. Arbella was arrested and placed under house arrest, while William was imprisoned in the Tower of London. The lovers attempted to escape. William fled the tower and tried to reach the coast, and Arbella, disguised as a man, attempted to flee by sea to reunite with him. Her ship was captured before it reached safety, and she was returned to custody. It was a dramatic episode, filled with the kind of romantic desperation that history so often preserves in legend. But the reality was bleak. Separated from William, Arbella was confined to the tower, where her mental and physical health began to deteriorate. While imprisoned, Arbella continued to write, and it is through her letters that we glimpse the full measure of her intellect and resilience. Her correspondence with royal officials, foreign ambassadors, and even King James himself reveals a woman who, even in chains, refused to be silenced. She pleaded her case with dignity and clarity, invoking the laws of succession, the rights of noble blood, and the cruelty of her treatment. Her letters are remarkable not only for their content but for their tone. They are the voice of a woman who understood precisely why she was feared and who refused to apologize for being who she was. Arbella's intellectual vigor, however, could not protect her from the long, slow decay of imprisonment. Denied freedom, companionship, and eventually even writing materials, she descended into ill health. Reports suggest she suffered from malnutrition, melancholy, and perhaps madness. Alone and broken, she died in 1615 at the age of 39, her body and spirit worn down by years of surveillance, imprisonment, and thwarted potential. Her death went largely unnoticed in the royal court. There was no grand funeral, no state mourning. She faded from the political landscape as she had lived, caught between the throne and the scaffold, too royal to be ignored, too female to be allowed power. What makes Arbella's story especially compelling is the way it illuminates the deep-seated fear that female political autonomy provoked in early modern England. Unlike her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, Arbella never ruled a kingdom, never commanded armies, and never sat on a throne. Yet she was treated with equal suspicion, locked away not for what she did, but for what she might become. Her mere existence, with her lineage, her marriage, and her mind, was enough to challenge the fragile structure of James's rule. The treatment of Arbella Stuart reflects the broader anxieties surrounding women and power in the early 17th century. Women could be queens, but only under strict conditions, preferably as figureheads, mothers of kings, or consorts to stronger men. A woman who asserted her own will, who married without permission, who wrote her own political letters and argued her case with the voice of an equal, that woman was a threat. And in Arbella's case, she was punished for it. Unlike Elizabeth I, who had managed to wield her femininity as a political asset and ruled with an iron will, Arbella had no crown to shield her, no advisors to fight for her, and no army to back her claim. And unlike Mary, Queen of Scots, she did not even have the chance to play the game of politics fully. Her moves were checked almost before they were made. But in many ways, This made her more dangerous to the regime. She was unpredictable, ungoverned, and symbolically potent. Arbella Stuart's legacy is a quiet but profound one. She never led a nation or changed the course of a war. Yet her life exposed the fragile underpinnings of monarchic succession and the deep discomfort the state had with female agency. She challenged the idea that royal women must remain passive, that marriage must be state-sanctioned, that intellect in a woman must serve obedience rather than ambition. In a world designed to silence women like her, she dared to speak and write and act. History remembers many queens, but Arbella Stuart was the queen who never was. Her story is not one of triumph, but of resistance, the resistance of a woman who refused to surrender her identity, even in the face of royal wrath. In her letters, in her choices, in her fall, she remains a symbol of a kind of courage often overlooked, the courage to claim oneself in a world that demands submission. Elizabeth Stuart, the daughter of James I of England and of Denmark, was born into a world of dynastic ambition and religious division. From her earliest days, her life was shaped by the political aspirations of her father, who had inherited a fragile union of the English and Scottish crowns and was navigating a Europe splintered by the Reformation. Elizabeth's upbringing reflected this complex context. She was educated in languages, theology, and politics, with an emphasis on Protestant values and royal duty. Unlike her brother Charles, who would one day become king, Elizabeth's role was never intended to be one of rule in her own realm. Instead, like many royal daughters of the time, her destiny was diplomatic, a pawn in the chessboard of international politics. In 1613, when she was just 16 years old, Elizabeth was married to Frederick V, the Elector Palatine of the Rhine. This match was not merely romantic, though the couple did share affection and compatibility. It was a carefully calculated alliance designed to strengthen Protestant unity in a Europe increasingly defined by sectarian conflict. Frederick was a leading Protestant prince of the Holy Roman Empire, and his court at Heidelberg was a bastion of Calvinism. The union between Elizabeth and Frederick symbolized the hopes of Protestants across the continent. It represented a bridge between England and the German principalities, a promise that the Protestant cause had royal support. The early years of Elizabeth's life in the Palatinate were filled with optimism. She quickly adapted to her new surroundings, embracing her role as electress with grace and intelligence. The court at Heidelberg flourished under her influence. Drawing from her English background, Elizabeth brought with her a taste for literature, art, and religious scholarship. The court became a vibrant cultural hub, attracting poets, theologians, philosophers, and artists. It was not just a place of regal display, but a center of Protestant thought and cultural exchange. Elizabeth, though young, proved to be a skilled hostess and an intellectual peer to the men and women who gathered around her. But the peace was short-lived. In 1619, a dramatic shift occurred in the political landscape of Europe. The Bohemian Estates, a group of Protestant nobles in what is now the Czech Republic, rebelled against the Catholic Habsburg rule of Ferdinand II. Desperate for a Protestant monarch to replace the Catholic king, they offered the crown of Bohemia to Frederick. It was an audacious move, one that would change Elizabeth's life forever. Against the advice of many European leaders, including King James, Frederick accepted the crown. He and Elizabeth journeyed to Prague, where they were crowned king and queen of Bohemia. The decision to accept the Bohemian crown was one of boldness and idealism, but it was also politically reckless. It provoked the wrath of the Habsburgs and sparked a devastating conflict that would become known as the 30 Years' War. Elizabeth, now known as the Winter Queen due to the brevity of her reign, spent only one winter in Prague before the Catholic forces of the Holy Roman Emperor defeated Frederick's army at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620. Forced to flee, the royal couple embarked on a life in exile that would last for the rest of their days. Though her reign in Bohemia was brief, Elizabeth's role in the events of the 30 Years' War was significant. As the figurehead of the Protestant cause, she became a symbol of resistance against Habsburg power and Catholic hegemony. She was no passive consort. Elizabeth actively corresponded with Protestant leaders, wrote political pamphlets, and advocated for her family's rights in courts across Europe. Her court in exile, first in The Hague and later in other parts of the Dutch Republic, became a hub for displaced Protestants and a rallying point for anti-Habsburg sentiment. Elizabeth's life in exile was marked by hardship, but it was also defined by resilience. She bore 13 children, many of whom would go on to play influential roles in European politics. Despite her precarious circumstances, she ensured that her children received the best education possible and were raised with a strong sense of duty and Protestant faith. Her eldest son, Charles Louis, would eventually be restored to the Palatinate after the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. But perhaps her most famous child was Sophia of Hanover, who became the mother of George I of Great Britain, thereby linking Elizabeth's bloodline directly to the future of the British monarchy. This maternal legacy is one of Elizabeth's most enduring contributions to European history. Through her children and grandchildren, she helped shape the dynastic landscape of the continent. Her descendants would occupy thrones in Britain, Prussia, and Hanover, spreading her influence across national and religious boundaries. Her ability to maintain a courtly and intellectual presence even in exile ensured that her offspring were not merely survivors, but significant players in the grand narrative of European power. Culturally, Elizabeth's court in Heidelberg had already laid the groundwork for her reputation as a patron of the arts and learning. Before the catastrophe of Bohemia, she had presided over a flourishing court that rivaled many in Europe. It was a place where Protestant theologians debated scripture, where poets composed verse in her honor, and where the ideals of Renaissance humanism met the fervor of Reformation faith. Even after the fall of her husband's rule, Elizabeth remained committed to the cultural and religious mission that had defined her life. In exile, she continued to surround herself with thinkers and artists, keeping alive the intellectual legacy of her brief reign. Elizabeth Stuart's life was shaped by choices, some hers, others made for her, and by a context that allowed little room for female agency. Yet within these constraints, she carved out a space of influence that defied her marginal political status. She was never a ruling queen in her own right, yet she became a queen who ruled hearts and minds, a sovereign in spirit if not in title. Her writings reveal a woman of intellect and wit, deeply engaged with the theological and political debates of her day. She was not content to be remembered as the Winter Queen alone. She sought to be a force for Protestant unity and dynastic continuity. In the broader history of the 30 Years' War and 17th century Europe, Elizabeth stands out as a rare figure of female political presence. Unlike many of her male contemporaries who wielded armies and wrote treaties, Elizabeth's power was subtler but no less significant. She maintained alliances, cultivated a courtly image that appealed to Protestant identity, and passed on a legacy that would ultimately reshape the British monarchy. Her life was filled with displacement, but never defeat. She endured the collapse of her husband's kingdom, the deaths of several children, and the indifference of monarchs who once promised support but failed to deliver. Yet she never surrendered the cause to which she had devoted her life. Elizabeth Stuart died in 1662, having outlived her husband by more than 30 years. She returned to England only briefly after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, but her place in British history had already been secured by her descendants. Her body was buried in Westminster Abbey, among the monarchs of England, a fitting recognition of a woman who had once been a queen without a country. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of personality, belief, and maternal legacy. While Elizabeth Stuart may never have reigned in the traditional sense, her influence rippled through centuries of European history. She bridged the Stuart and Hanoverian lines, served as a beacon for Protestant identity in a time of Catholic resurgence, and used exile not as an end, but as a platform for continued political engagement. Her legacy, like her life, defies simple categorization. She was a queen of winter, but also of memory, of culture, and of hope for a fractured Europe. Henrietta Maria of France, the youngest daughter of King Henry IV of France and Marie de' Medici, entered the English court in 1625 as the Catholic bride of King Charles I. Her arrival marked a significant moment in Stuart England. not only because of the political ramifications of a Catholic queen in a Protestant realm, but also because of the immense personal, cultural, and political influence she would go on to wield. Though never crowned due to her Catholic faith, a religious difference that remained a source of controversy throughout her life, Henrietta Maria exercised a subtle but powerful form of unofficial power that reached far beyond the traditional confines of queenship. Henrietta Maria's French upbringing had instilled in her a strong sense of Catholic identity, courtly sophistication, and a taste for the visual and performing arts. When she came to England as a teenage bride, she faced suspicion and even outright hostility from many in the English establishment. Her Catholicism clashed with the dominant Anglicanism of the court and the deeply embedded anti-Catholic sentiment of the English population. For years, she was viewed with wariness, seen as an outsider and a potential threat to the religious integrity of the English monarchy. Even the ceremony of her marriage reflected this division. Charles I married her by proxy in France, but there was no Anglican coronation, as she refused to participate in Protestant rites. Despite the difficult beginning, Henrietta Maria's relationship with Charles I grew stronger over time. What had begun as a politically expedient union evolved into a close and affectionate partnership. Charles came to deeply trust and confide in his wife, and her influence at court increased correspondingly. While she never held formal political power, Henrietta Maria became one of her husband's most trusted advisors. She exercised influence through her intimate access to the king and through her patronage of courtiers, artists, and foreign envoys. Her voice could be heard in matters ranging from diplomatic appointments to decisions on religious policy, often working behind the scenes rather than in public view. Religion remained one of the most contentious elements of Henrietta Maria's presence in England. She maintained a private Catholic household within the royal court, attended Mass, and kept close contact with Catholic advisors, which fed into existing fears of popery and absolutism. Her influence was seen by many as encouraging Charles's own sympathies toward Arminianism, a strain of Anglicanism that was closer in ritual and hierarchy to Catholicism than the more austere Calvinist traditions of many English Protestants. As tensions grew between the monarchy and Parliament over issues of religion, taxation, and royal prerogative, Henrietta Maria increasingly became a symbol of what many feared was a return to Catholic dominance. Her foreign origin, her private chapel, and her bold personality all made her a target for criticism and even caricature in Puritan pamphlets and propaganda. Yet her contributions to the cultural life of the Stuart court were remarkable. Drawing on her French heritage and connections, Henrietta Maria brought with her a vibrant aesthetic sensibility that transformed the English court into a stage for artistic expression. She became a major patron of the arts, supporting painters, architects, poets, and especially the theater. She collaborated with leading artists such as Anthony van Dyck, whose portraits of the royal family helped shape the visual identity of the Stuart monarchy. Under her patronage, the court masque, a form of elaborate theatrical performance that combined music, dance, poetry, and visual spectacle, reached new heights. Henrietta Maria often took part in these masques herself, not merely as a passive observer but as an active performer, using them as a form of political theater to promote ideas of divine monarchy, harmony, and the beauty of royal authority. Henrietta Maria's role in these performances was not simply ornamental. The masques she sponsored and participated in projected a vision of monarchy that aligned with the divine right of kings, a political doctrine Charles fervently believed in. Her artistic patronage thus became an extension of her political and religious ideals. Through the cultivation of courtly aesthetics, she supported a royal image that was both authoritative and divinely sanctioned, deeply interwoven with the sacred aura of kingship. This, in turn, fed into the broader ideological battles of the era, where art and performance were not neutral, but deeply charged with meaning. When England descended into civil war in 1642, Henrietta Maria's political involvement moved from the symbolic to the overt. Determined to protect her husband's throne and their family's future, she became a vigorous and daring political agent. At great personal risk, she traveled abroad to raise funds, secure arms, and negotiate alliances with foreign Catholic powers. Her French royal connections, which had once made her suspect in England, now became crucial assets in the royalist struggle. She raised money from Catholic nobles, purchased weapons on the continent, and even attempted to negotiate military aid for Charles. Her journey back to England in 1643 was nothing short of heroic, undertaken during stormy weather and under threat of interception. Upon her arrival in Yorkshire, she was welcomed as a savior by royalist forces. She reunited with Charles in Oxford, where she attempted to coordinate with his advisors and urge him toward a more aggressive military strategy. While some royalists admired her courage and dedication, others were wary of her influence, fearing that her advice was too impetuous or her French background too alien to English sensibilities. Despite these tensions, Henrietta Maria remained a vital force within the royalist cause throughout the war. She used her extensive network of contacts to send letters, make appeals, and mobilize resources. Her correspondence during this period reveals her intelligence, tenacity, and deep emotional investment in the fate of the monarchy. Even as the royalist position weakened, she continued to fight for Charles's cause, both on the battlefield of opinion and in the courts of Europe. The defeat of the royalists in the Civil War marked the collapse of the world Henrietta Maria had fought so hard to preserve. Charles's eventual capture, trial, and execution in 1649 left her a widow in exile, her influence reduced but her cause unforgotten. She settled in France, where she continued to work for the restoration of the monarchy and the future of her children. Her son, Charles II, would eventually be restored to the English throne in 1660, in part thanks to the network and legacy that Henrietta Maria had kept alive during years of upheaval. Even in exile, Henrietta Maria maintained a small court that preserved the rituals and ideals of Stuart monarchy. She continued to patronize the arts and upheld the traditions of Catholic devotion. Her exile was not a retreat from politics, but a continuation of her role in shaping the identity of the monarchy from a distance. She remained involved in the marriages and political trajectories of her children, using what influence she had to ensure that in death, as in life, Henrietta Maria remained a controversial figure. To royalists and many in the Catholic world, she was a loyal queen, a courageous partner, and a powerful defender of the divine right of kings. To her critics, especially among Puritans and parliamentarians, she was a dangerous influence, a foreign interloper who had helped push the kingdom toward tyranny and religious corruption. Yet beyond these partisan assessments lies a more complex and fascinating figure, a woman who, in the face of deep cultural and religious opposition, carved out a space of power and purpose through determination, intelligence, and a profound sense of dynastic loyalty. Henrietta Maria was never officially part of the machinery of government. She held no office, signed no decrees, commanded no army. But her ability to shape the court's religious tone, artistic vision, and political orientation made her one of the most significant figures of her era. She was a queen consort who acted with the confidence and strategic acumen of a political leader, often stepping in where others hesitated. Her unofficial power, exercised through relationships, culture, faith, and diplomacy, was no less real for being informal. In many ways, it was precisely this unofficial nature that made her so influential and so dangerous in the eyes of her enemies. The story of Henrietta Maria is ultimately one of paradox. She was both outsider and insider, foreigner and queen, a patron of beauty and a warrior for political survival. Her legacy is not one of quiet censorship, but of bold engagement, marked by creativity, conviction, and an unwavering belief in the divine mission of her family. She embodied a form of female power that operated in the shadows of official authority, yet left lasting imprints on the monarchy, the arts, and the shape of England itself. Mary, Elizabeth, and Henrietta, the three daughters of Charles I of England and Queen Henrietta Maria, lived during one of the most tumultuous and transformative periods in British history. Born into a court of majesty and absolutist principles, their early lives were marked by luxury, courtly ceremony, and dynastic expectation. Yet the English Civil War, The execution of their father and the shifting sands of power across Europe would transform their destinies and mold them into women who bore personal, political, and symbolic burdens far beyond their youthful dreams. Each daughter came to represent a different facet of Stuart resilience, adaptation, and diplomatic influence, one in the Protestant Dutch Republic, one in cloistered spiritual suffering, and one in the dazzling yet dangerous court of Bourbon, France. Together, their stories reveal the often hidden, yet profoundly significant, influence of royal women in the dynastic politics of 17th-century Europe. Mary, the eldest of the three, was born in 1631 and was swiftly engaged in the political game of dynastic marriages. At the age of 9, she was betrothed to William II of Orange, the son of Frederick Henry, the stadtholder of the Dutch Republic. The marriage, solemnized in 1641, symbolized an alliance between the English crown and one of the foremost Protestant states of Europe. While the union was intended to strengthen Protestant unity against Catholic adversaries like Spain and France, it was also rooted in personal ambition, prestige, and strategic alignment. For Mary, this marriage catapulted her into a new world, the decentralized, merchant-dominated, Calvinist Republic of the Netherlands, where royal authority was tempered by civic and military powers. Mary's life in the Dutch Republic was not without its complications. The Netherlands was undergoing internal tension between the Orangist faction, which favored monarchical rule and military expansion, and the Republican faction, which championed parliamentary sovereignty and civic independence. As Princess of Orange, Mary was caught in these tensions. She sought to maintain her dignity and influence as a Stuart princess, asserting her status at court even when her English royal background became politically problematic, especially after the English monarchy fell and her father was executed in 1649. Her Protestant faith and her familial connection to the Stuart cause gave her a unique position, at once a potential political asset and a figure of controversy. After the death of her husband William II in 1650, only a week before the birth of their son, William III, Mary's role shifted. She became a widow at 19 and the mother of a future stadtholder and king. This placed her in a politically sensitive and increasingly isolated position. Her efforts to raise her son as a loyal Stuart heir while preserving his Dutch inheritance were complicated by her strained relationship with her in-laws and the political situation in both the Dutch Republic and England. Nevertheless, Mary continued to act diplomatically, maintaining correspondence with her royalist brothers in exile and advocating for their causes. She served as a crucial conduit between the royalist faction and potential European allies. While she never returned to England in triumph, her legacy was cemented through her son, William III, who would eventually become King of England, Scotland, and Ireland during the Glorious Revolution of 1688. In this way, Mary's marriage, widowhood, and quiet political maneuvering bore dynastic fruit that would shape the future of the British monarchy. Elizabeth, the second daughter of Charles I, was born in 1635 and experienced a vastly different fate. Unlike Mary, whose youth was spent abroad in relative freedom and diplomatic activity, Elizabeth's life was defined by imprisonment, personal loss, and religious reflection. As the Civil War turned against her father, Elizabeth, along with her younger siblings, was taken into custody by the parliamentary forces. Her life was shaped by long stretches of confinement, first under parliamentary supervision and later in more restrictive conditions following the execution of Charles I. She was separated from her family, denied courtly upbringing, and plunged into a world of sorrow, spiritual introspection, and quiet endurance. Despite her youth, Elizabeth demonstrated extraordinary composure and intellectual depth. Her letters and writings reveal a precocious child with a keen sense of duty, piety, and emotional intelligence. She became a living symbol of the royalist cause, an innocent and tragic victim of the upheavals that had shattered the monarchy. Her captivity served both as a point of shame for parliamentarian forces and as a rallying image for royalist sympathizers, who saw in her suffering the moral injustice of regicide and revolution. Tragically, Elizabeth's life was cut short. In 1650, while held at Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight, She fell ill and died at the age of 14. Her death was both a personal loss to her family and a potent political symbol. Stuart supporters held her up as a martyr, a princess who had endured with grace and Christian virtue the cruelties inflicted upon her house. Her quiet death in captivity came to represent the spiritual righteousness of the Stuart cause, contrasted with the harshness of revolutionary zeal. Though Elizabeth left no descendants, her image, young, dignified in sorrow, continued to influence royalist memory and was later revived during the Restoration as a testament to the innocence and legitimacy. The youngest of Charles I's daughters, Henrietta and, affectionately known as Minette, was born in 1644, during the height of the English Civil War. Unlike her sisters, her early life was shaped by flight and exile. As the conflict turned deadly for the Royalists, Henrietta Maria, the Queen, fled to France with Minette in her arms. Raised in the courts of her French relatives, Minette grew up immersed in the glamour and intrigue of Bourbon France, forming a close relationship with Louis XIV, her cousin. Though she was English by birth, her identity was shaped by French language, culture, and Catholicism. As she matured, Henrietta became a valuable dynastic asset, and in 1661, she married Philippe I, Duke of Orleans, the brother of Louis XIV. This marriage linked the Stuarts directly to the heart of French royal power, but it came at a personal cost. Philippe was known for his flamboyant lifestyle and same-sex relationships, and his jealousy and controlling behavior made their marriage tense and emotionally taxing. Despite this, Henrietta carved out a role for herself at court as a charming, intelligent, and politically savvy figure. She earned respect from her brother-in-law Louis XIV and became an informal but effective diplomat. Her most significant contribution to European politics came in the secret negotiations that led to the Treaty of Dover in 1670. Acting as an intermediary between Louis XIV and her brother Charles II, now restored to the English throne, Henrietta facilitated a clandestine alliance that committed England to support French military actions in Europe in exchange for subsidies. The treaty also included a secret clause in which Charles II promised to convert to Catholicism, a promise he never fulfilled publicly. Henrietta's role in this negotiation was vital. She was trusted by both courts, understood the intricacies of diplomacy, and possessed the charm and discretion needed for such delicate matters. Her success in diplomacy was, however, short-lived. Only weeks after her return from England following the treaty, Henrietta fell seriously ill and died suddenly at the age of 26. Rumors of poisoning circulated widely, fueled by her troubled relationship with Philippe and the high-stakes nature of her diplomatic activities. Though officially declared a natural death, the mystery surrounding her final days only added to her aura as a tragic royal woman caught between the demands of power and the dangers of court life. Despite her early death, Henrietta left a lasting impression on the courts of both France and England. Her charm, tact, and intelligence had made her a favorite of Louis XIV, and her diplomacy had achieved what many seasoned envoys could not. She was mourned deeply by those who had known her, and her memory became part of the broader narrative of Stuart sacrifice, elegance, and doomed potential. Together, Mary, Elizabeth, and Henrietta illuminate the diverse paths that royal women could take during a time of civil war, exile, and dynastic struggle. Their lives illustrate how daughters of kings were more than passive pawns in marriage alliances. They were active agents in diplomacy, symbols of political legitimacy, and participants in the construction of royal memory. Each sister embodied a different form of influence. Mary as the matriarch whose son would reclaim the English throne for Protestantism, Elizabeth as the spiritual martyr of the Stuart cause, and Henrietta as the elegant and effective diplomatic bridge between England and France. Their stories also underscore the vulnerability and power that accompanied female royalty. They were born into privilege but exposed to extreme danger. They moved between courts and cultures, often crossing borders not only of geography but of religion, language, and politics. They were shaped by events beyond their control, yet found ways to assert their will, protect their family's legacy, and leave a mark on history. In the broader context of Stuart history, these three women, though often overshadowed by their male relatives, played crucial roles in sustaining the monarchy's image, forging international alliances, and embodying the personal costs of political upheaval. They were not merely royal daughters. They were witnesses to the fall and rise of their dynasty and agents of its survival in foreign courts and future generations. Their lives reflect the hidden influence of Stuart women, whose power lay not in crowns or parliaments, but in their capacity to endure, to connect, and to shape the destinies of nations from behind the scenes. Sophia of Hanover, though never crowned queen, remains one of the most pivotal figures in the evolution of British monarchy and European intellectual history. Born in 1630 as the 12th child of Frederick V, Elector Palatine, and Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of James I of England, she was steeped in a unique heritage that straddled the English and continental European traditions. Her bloodline carried the legitimacy of the Stuart dynasty, but her life unfolded primarily within the courts and intellectual circles of the Holy Roman Empire. In this dual identity, Sophia became a bridge between the old Stuart monarchy and the new Hanoverian dynasty, shaping not only the future of the British throne but also embedding Enlightenment values in courtly and dynastic culture. Her life, rich in intellect, diplomacy, and maternal influence, defined an age of transition and enlightenment, all the while positioning her as the matriarch of a new royal lineage that would alter British history forever. Sophia's early life was formed amid political instability and familial exile. Her father, known as the Winter King of Bohemia, had briefly ruled as king before being driven from the throne, which left Sophia's family in a state of near-perpetual displacement. However, her mother, Elizabeth Stuart, ensured that the children, including Sophia, were steeped in the culture and ideals of their royal English lineage. Sophia internalized not only the grandeur and sense of divine mission associated with Stuart royalty, but also the intellectual curiosity and resilience that would later mark her personal and public life. Raised in the Dutch Republic and later in Heidelberg, Sophia was educated in an environment where Calvinist ideals, humanist values, and classical learning coexisted. This gave her a sophisticated understanding of politics, theology, and philosophy. She became fluent in multiple languages and was encouraged to read widely, a privilege not often granted to women in the 17th century. This intellectual formation laid the foundation for her later engagement with some of the most significant thinkers of her time, most notably Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Sophia married Ernest Augustus, Elector of Brunswick-Lüneburg, later Hanover, in 1658. Though it was a union driven by dynastic considerations, their marriage proved successful, and Sophia navigated court life with a blend of diplomatic tact and intellectual engagement. She bore 7 children who survived into adulthood, including her most famous son, George Louis, who would later ascend the British throne as George I. Through her maternal role, Sophia influenced the shaping of the Hanoverian dynasty's political and cultural identity, ensuring it would carry forward a legacy that combined both Protestant values and a pragmatic approach to governance. As the Protestant succession in England became an increasingly urgent issue in the late 17th century, Sophia emerged as a central figure in dynastic politics. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 had replaced the Catholic James II with his Protestant daughter Mary II and her husband William III. Yet, with neither producing a surviving heir, and Queen Anne's many pregnancies ending in stillbirth or the early death of her children, the English crown faced a potential succession crisis. Fearing the return of a Catholic monarch, Parliament passed the Act of Settlement in 1701. This law explicitly named Sophia of Hanover and her Protestant descendants as the heirs to the English throne, bypassing dozens of closer blood relatives who were Catholic. With this act, Sophia was recognized as the next rightful successor, effectively establishing her as the uncrowned queen-in-waiting of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Sophia's inclusion in the Act of Settlement was no mere formality. It reflected both the legitimacy of her Stuart lineage and the widespread respect she commanded across Protestant Europe. Her temperament, learning, and moderate religious views made her an ideal candidate to carry forward the Protestant constitutional monarchy. She understood the balance between divine right and parliamentary power, recognizing that modern monarchy must be tempered by Enlightenment principles and civic responsibility. Though she never set foot in England, her reputation there was robust, bolstered by her extensive correspondence with British courtiers, intellectuals, and even her cousin Queen, and, though their relationship grew strained in Sophia's final years. Perhaps one of the most compelling aspects of Sophia's legacy is her role as a patron and interlocutor of Enlightenment thought. In an era when female rulers and consorts were often relegated to ceremonial or domestic roles, Sophia carved out a space for intellectual leadership. Her long-standing correspondence with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz is among the most significant intellectual exchanges of the period. Their letters covered an astonishing range of subjects: metaphysics, theology, politics, education, and the nature of the soul. Sophia was not a passive recipient of Leibniz's ideas. She was an engaged, thoughtful participant who questioned, challenged, and refined philosophical arguments. Through this exchange, Sophia helped to disseminate Enlightenment ideas within a dynastic and aristocratic context. Her court at Herrenhausen near Hanover became a salon of learning and philosophical debate, attracting scholars, theologians, and scientists. She encouraged the translation of classical texts, supported early scientific investigations, and sought to bring rational thought into the domain of governance. Her patronage extended to the arts as well, helping to foster a vibrant cultural scene that rivaled the better-known courts of Paris and Vienna. This cultural and intellectual leadership ensured that the Hanoverian court was not merely a political power but also a beacon of modernity and reason. Sophia's approach to religion also reflected the temper of the Enlightenment. A committed Protestant, she nevertheless advocated for tolerance and ecumenical dialogue. Her Calvinist upbringing and her experience with diverse religious traditions across Europe made her sensitive to the destructive potential of sectarianism. In her writings and actions, she emphasized reasoned faith and moral integrity over dogmatic adherence, a position that resonated with the broader movement toward religious moderation and philosophical inquiry. Her influence extended even to ecclesiastical policy in Hanover, where she promoted clerics who were known for their learning and balanced views rather than their fanaticism. While she remained active in court and intellectual life well into her later years, Sophia was acutely aware of her looming role as the future Queen of Britain. She prepared for this possibility with characteristic diligence, maintaining diplomatic ties, studying British politics, and corresponding with key figures in London. Yet fate would intervene in a final, ironic twist. In June 1714, at the age of 83, Sophia died suddenly of a stroke while walking in the gardens of Herrenhausen. Just 2 months later, Queen Anne passed away, and Sophia's son, George I, ascended the British throne as the first monarch of the House of Hanover. Though she never wore the crown, Sophia's legacy was now enshrined in the very structure of the British monarchy. Her influence did not end with the accession of George I. The Hanoverian dynasty, established through her, would go on to rule Britain through the 18th and 19th centuries, culminating in the Victorian era and shaping the British Empire at its zenith. The principles Sophia upheld, religious moderation, constitutional monarchy, and Enlightenment learning, became hallmarks of the British political system, distinguishing it from the absolutism of many continental regimes. Furthermore, Sophia's intellectual and dynastic legacy extended into the fabric of European politics. Her children and grandchildren married into many of the major royal houses of Europe, creating a web of alliances that helped to stabilize Protestant Europe and promote cultural exchange. Her vision of monarchy was not one of personal aggrandizement or divine mystique, but of educated stewardship and civic engagement. Through her correspondence, patronage, and courtly example, she modeled a form of queenship that valued intellect as much as lineage, prudence as much as power. In historical memory, Sophia of Hanover stands as a figure of quiet but profound influence. She did not rule a country or command armies, but she shaped the direction of a monarchy, fostered an intellectual climate that supported Enlightenment values, and ensured the continuity of Protestant succession in a turbulent time. Her life reminds us that power can reside not only in crowns and titles, but in the guidance of ideas, the nurturing of minds, and the forging of legacies that outlast a single lifetime. She remains the uncrowned queen whose wisdom, foresight, and unwavering dedication helped chart a new course for Britain and Europe at the dawn of the modern age. The story of the Stuart women in exile is one of quiet endurance, political complexity, and cultural reinvention. After the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which saw the Catholic King James II deposed and replaced by his Protestant daughter Mary II and her husband William III of Orange, a shadow fell over the female members of the Stuart dynasty. Many were forced to abandon their homes, titles, and official positions. What followed was a period of dislocation and adaptation as these women, queens, princesses, and consorts redefined their identities and roles within unfamiliar courts, mostly across the Channel in Catholic France. This phase of Stuart history, though often sidelined in accounts focused on wars and male rulers, reveals the inner strength and subtle influence of the women who carried their lineage with them into exile. Henrietta Maria, the French Catholic queen consort of Charles I and mother of James II, had already experienced the hardships of exile during and after the English Civil War. Following the execution of her husband in 1649, she had fled to France with her youngest children. There, she established a modest yet vibrant court in exile at the Château de Colombe near Paris. Her court became a center for cultural and religious activity, a place where royalist identity was kept alive through ceremony, ritual, and the arts. Even though she lived far from the political heart of England, Henrietta Maria remained a symbolic figure for English royalists, a widow queen whose presence embodied the Stuart cause and the legitimacy of divine monarchy. Her influence extended into matters of faith and education. A devout Catholic, she instilled in her children, especially James, a strong sense of religious identity that would shape the future of the Stuart line. Her court was a haven for Catholic writers, musicians, and clergy, fostering a blend of English tradition and continental refinement. She maintained correspondence with religious figures and used her status to promote Catholic causes across Europe. Yet, even as she nurtured a cultural community, she remained isolated from the political life of England. Her presence in France was tolerated, even welcomed by Louis XIV, but she operated with limited resources and increasing age. Nonetheless, the seeds she planted in exile, of Stuart legitimacy, Catholic loyalty, and cultural sophistication, would bloom later in her son's reign and his descendants' identities. When James II succeeded his brother Charles II in 1685, Henrietta Maria's vision seemed momentarily vindicated. But his overt Catholicism and attempts to grant religious freedom to Catholics and dissenters provoked deep unrest in a fiercely Protestant nation. When he was finally overthrown during the Glorious Revolution, the resulting exile cut deeper into the Stuart family. James fled to France with his young Catholic wife, Mary of Modena, and their infant son, James Francis Edward. This second Stuart court in exile took root at the Château of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, granted by Louis XIV, and soon became the epicenter of the Jacobite cause. Mary of Modena, now queen in exile, faced the daunting challenge of representing monarchy under the glare of suspicion and loss. Her stepsisters-in-law, Mary II and Anne, had remained in England and sided with the revolution. This splits the family along lines not just of politics and religion but of identity and survival. For Mary of Modena, exile brought both personal sorrow and a renewed sense of duty. Isolated from her Protestant stepdaughters, she was often portrayed in English propaganda as a foreign, papist interloper, an image she worked to counter through personal dignity and devotion. Despite the cold climate of French court politics, Mary of Modena managed to assert a quiet authority within her limited domain. At Saint-Germain, she cultivated a circle of loyal Jacobite supporters, clerics, tutors, and ladies-in-waiting. The court, though modest compared to Versailles, upheld the ceremonial life of monarchy. Masses were held, portraits painted, and royal rituals observed. Mary also oversaw the education of her son, James Francis Edward, shaping him into the Old Pretender, a symbol of Stuart hope and continuity. She emphasized faith, honor, and the rights of divine succession, ensuring that even in exile, the Stuart idea of kingship remained intact. The exile also exacted a tremendous emotional toll. Mary of Modena suffered multiple personal losses, including the deaths of her daughters and the permanent estrangement from her stepdaughters. She lived under constant anxiety about the safety of her son and the fate of her family's claim. Though supported by French pension and protection, the court at Saint-Germain remained a politically impotent symbol. Diplomats and agents came and went, but few practical gains were made toward a Stuart restoration. Still, Mary persisted in her role as queen, showing strength not in armies or decrees, but in enduring humiliation, displacement, and grief with a grace that preserved the image of Stuart royalty. Mary II, the elder daughter of James II, experienced exile from a different angle. Though she remained in England and ruled as co-monarch with her husband William III, her role in the deposition of her father created an irreparable rupture. Raised a Protestant, but deeply attached to her father, Mary struggled with the moral complexity of taking his crown. Her decision to accept the throne was based not on personal ambition but on the perceived necessity of preserving Protestantism and national stability. Yet, this choice weighed heavily on her conscience, and her relationship with her Catholic stepmother, Mary of Modena, became strained to the point of silence. And the younger daughter of James II eventually succeeded Mary and William as queen, ruling from 1702 to 1714. Though she had once been close to Mary of Modena during her childhood, their bond dissolved in the wake of the Glorious Revolution. Anne's reign was marked by intense factionalism and personal tragedy, including the loss of all her children. She never reconciled with her father before his death in 1701, nor with her half-brother James Francis Edward, who remained in exile. Anne's attempts to secure the Protestant succession led directly to the Act of Settlement, which bypassed dozens of Catholic relatives and ultimately paved the way for the Hanoverian dynasty. The emotional damage wrought by these familial divisions is difficult to overstate. The Stuart women were not merely pawns or figureheads. They were daughters, wives, and mothers caught in a web of competing loyalties. They were torn between personal love and political necessity, between blood ties and confessional lines. The constant threat of war, the reality of disinheritance, and the bitterness of propaganda left deep scars. Mary II died without ever reconciling with her father or stepmother. Anne's final years were shadowed by loneliness and a sense of failure. Meanwhile, Mary of Modena aged in Saint-Germain, surrounded by memories and rituals, her role as queen increasingly symbolic rather than real. Yet exile was not entirely defined by loss. It also became a space for reinvention. The courts of Henrietta Maria and Mary of Modena served as cultural repositories, preserving the ethos of the Stuart monarchy in art, literature, and religious devotion. These courts attracted writers, musicians, and scholars who helped translate the Stuart ideal into a romantic, almost mythic narrative. The image of the lost king, the exiled queen, and the rightful heir took on a kind of tragic nobility, inspiring generations of Jacobites and Romantics alike. The very fact of displacement gave these women a moral stature that often exceeded that of their political contemporaries. Their suffering, their resilience, and their unwavering sense of purpose became powerful symbols. Even in their most powerless moments, the Stuart women continued to embody a sense of destiny. Their letters, portraits, and ceremonial roles in exile all served to project continuity. They were the keepers of memory, of legitimacy, and of a royal ideal that outlived the practical politics. The exile of the Stuart women reveals a parallel history to the official narratives of revolution and succession. It is a history told through letters rather than treaties, through devotion rather than decrees. These women, often silenced in public discourse, nonetheless shaped the cultural and emotional contours of their age. They bore the burdens of dynasty with remarkable dignity, and in doing so, left a legacy that resonates far beyond the fallen thrones they left behind. Their lives in exile remind us that power can also be preserved in silence, in ritual, in memory, and that the Stuart story, though dislodged from Westminster, found new life in the quiet salons and candlelit chapels of foreign courts. Mary II and Queen and daughters of James II each ascended the English throne under markedly different circumstances, yet their reigns collectively encapsulate a transformative era in British history. Mary II's joint rule with her husband William III established a precedent for constitutional monarchy, while Anne's tenure witnessed the culmination of the Stuart dynasty and the unification of England and Scotland. Their personal lives, marked by profound tragedies and complex relationships, intertwined with the political and religious upheavals of their time, shaping the course of the nation. Mary II's ascent to the throne was precipitated by the Glorious Revolution of 1688, a bloodless coup that deposed her father, James II, due to his Catholic faith and autocratic tendencies. Invited by Protestant leaders, Mary and her husband William of Orange accepted the crown jointly, a unique arrangement in English history. Their reign, beginning in 1689, was characterized by a commitment to Protestantism and constitutional governance. Mary, though sharing power with William, often deferred to him in political matters, reflecting both personal inclination and societal expectations of female subordination. Nonetheless, her presence lent legitimacy to the new regime, particularly among English subjects wary of foreign influence. Mary's public image was that of a pious and dutiful queen, embodying Protestant virtues in contrast to her father's Catholicism. Her reign was marked by efforts to stabilize the kingdom after the upheaval of the Revolution, including the passage of the Bill of Rights in 1689, which limited royal prerogative and affirmed parliamentary supremacy. Mary's personal life, however, was tinged with sorrow. She and William had no surviving children, a fact that would later contribute to succession concerns. Mary's death from smallpox in 1694 left William to rule alone until his own death in 1702. And Mary's younger sister succeeded William III, becoming queen in 1702. Her reign was marked by both personal tragedy and significant political developments, and endured 17 pregnancies, yet none of her children survived to adulthood. This series of losses not only caused profound personal grief, but also created a succession crisis, ultimately leading to the Act of Settlement in 1701, which designated the Protestant House of Hanover as heirs to the throne. Anne's health was frail, and she suffered from gout and other ailments, which often confined her to her chambers and limited her political engagement. Despite these challenges, Anne's reign saw the unification of England and Scotland through the Act of Union in 1707, forming the Kingdom of Great Britain. This legislative union was driven by mutual economic and security interests, and Anne played a crucial role in its realization. She appointed commissioners to negotiate the terms and worked to secure parliamentary approval, understanding the long-term benefits of a united kingdom. The union also aimed to prevent the restoration of a Catholic monarch by ensuring a Protestant succession across both nations. Anne's personal relationships significantly influenced her reign, particularly her close friendship with Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough. Their bond, formed during Anne's youth, evolved into a powerful political alliance, with Sarah wielding considerable influence over court appointments and policy decisions. However, Sarah's assertiveness and political ambitions eventually strained their relationship. Anne's growing discomfort with Sarah's dominance led to the rise of Abigail Masham, a cousin of Sarah's, who offered the queen a more submissive companionship. This shift in favor precipitated a court rivalry that mirrored the broader political divisions between the Whigs, aligned with Sarah, and the Tories, supported by Abigail. The deterioration of Anne's relationship with Sarah Churchill had significant political ramifications. Sarah's husband, John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, was a leading military commander during the War of the Spanish Succession. As Anne distanced herself from Sarah, the Marlboroughs' influence waned, leading to shifts in military and foreign policy. Anne's preference for Tory advisors reflected her desire for a more conservative and Anglican-aligned government, contrasting with the Whigs' more progressive and dissenting tendencies. Anne's reign concluded with her death in 1714, marking the end of the Stuart dynasty. The lack of a direct Protestant heir led to the accession of George I from the House of Hanover, as stipulated by the Act of Settlement. Anne's legacy is multifaceted. She presided over a significant constitutional development with the Union of England and Scotland, navigated complex religious and political landscapes, and endured personal hardships with resilience. Her reign set the stage for the modern British state, balancing monarchical tradition with emerging parliamentary governance. The influence of the Stuart women extended far beyond the political sphere, deeply shaping the cultural landscape of their time through their patronage of the arts, music, fashion, and architecture. Their engagement with culture was not only a reflection of their personal tastes and backgrounds, but also an essential element of their political and social strategy, enhancing their status, solidifying alliances, and projecting power. The cultural patronage of the Stuart women manifested in many ways, from the grand courts they fostered to the public works they commissioned. Elizabeth Stuart, often called the Winter Queen, was a significant figure in this regard. Married to Frederick V, Elector Palatine, she helped transform the Palatinate court into a major cultural hub in early 17th century Europe. Through her patronage, the court became a beacon for Protestant culture, attracting artists, musicians, and intellectuals who contributed to a vibrant environment of creativity and learning. This environment fostered not only the arts but also religious and political ideas that resonated across Europe, especially during the turbulent years of the 30 Years' War. Elizabeth's court exemplified the way royal patronage could serve multiple purposes. It was a stage to display political legitimacy and religious commitment, particularly Protestant identity, during a time of Catholic-Protestant conflict. It was also a center for the production and dissemination of art and music that reflected the tastes and values of the court. The cultural activities there included theatrical performances, musical compositions, and the commissioning of paintings and sculptures, all aimed at reinforcing the prestige of the ruling family and advancing their political and religious goals. Henrietta Maria, queen consort to Charles I, similarly used cultural patronage to enhance the royal image and courtly life in England. Being a French Catholic princess, she brought with her a sophisticated appreciation for the arts, which she integrated into the English court through her sponsorship of masques, theatrical productions, and elaborate court pageantry. These entertainments were more than just frivolous amusements. They were carefully orchestrated displays of royal authority, political allegory, and religious symbolism. Masques, a form of festive court entertainment involving music, dance, elaborate costumes, and stage design, flourished under Henrietta Maria's influence. These performances often celebrated the monarchy, glorified the divine right of kings, and conveyed messages of unity and loyalty to the crown. The Queen's patronage supported prominent playwrights and composers, including Ben Jonson and Inigo Jones, who were key figures in shaping the masque as a sophisticated art form. This cultural flourishing under Henrietta Maria helped to define the Stuart court's identity and left a lasting legacy in English theatrical history. In addition to her support of theater, Henrietta Maria also influenced fashion and court aesthetics. She introduced French styles to England, impacting how court ladies dressed and presenting a more continental, cosmopolitan image of the monarchy. This not only reflected her personal background but also served to assert the Stuart dynasty's connection to broader European aristocratic culture. Her patronage of the arts, therefore, extended beyond performance to the visual and material culture of the court, affecting how power and status were visually communicated. Queen Anne's contribution to cultural legacy, while marked by personal health struggles, was significant particularly in the realm of religious institutions and architecture. Her reign saw substantial support for the Anglican Church, and this was expressed not only through political acts but also through patronage of church building and restoration projects. Under Anne's patronage, the work of Sir Christopher Wren, one of England's most renowned architects, flourished. Wren's churches, built or rebuilt after the Great Fire of London, symbolized the resilience and continuity of the Anglican establishment. Anne's support for Anglican architecture was part of a broader effort to reinforce the Church's role in national life, consolidating the religious identity of Britain after decades of conflict and division. The new churches were not only places of worship but also physical manifestations of political stability and the divine sanction of the Protestant monarchy. by promoting such projects and contributed to a legacy that was both spiritual and cultural, linking the monarchy to the enduring institutions of a nation. Moreover, the Stuart women's patronage extended into music, which was an essential part of court life and religious observance. Elizabeth Stuart's court in Heidelberg was noted for its musical culture, with composers and musicians finding patronage and audiences there. Music served as both entertainment and a form of religious expression, particularly in Protestant courts where congregational singing and instrumental music were important parts of worship and court ceremony. Henrietta Maria's patronage also influenced the development of English music, especially in the context of court masques and other ceremonial occasions. The elaborate musical scores composed for these events demonstrated a blending of artistic traditions from France and England, showcasing the cultural exchange fostered by the Queen's background and preferences. This fusion enriched the English musical tradition and helped elevate the status of court musicians and composers. The fashion and personal style of Stuart women were equally impactful, reflecting wider social and political trends. As public figures, their appearance was closely watched and often emulated by the nobility and gentry. The introduction of French fashions by Henrietta Maria and the continued refinement of court dress under later queens played a role in shaping the visual culture of the period. Clothing was not simply about aesthetics, but a means of expressing political allegiance, religious affiliation, and social rank. Architecture under the Stuarts, particularly during Anne's reign, reflected a shift towards grandeur and symbolism, reinforcing the monarchy's authority and the nation's identity. The churches and public buildings commissioned or supported by these women embodied a vision of Britain as a stable, Protestant kingdom with a strong connection between church and state. These buildings were designed not only for function but also to impress, inspire loyalty, and convey a sense of permanence. In sum, the cultural patronage of Stuart women was a multifaceted phenomenon that combined art, music, fashion, and architecture into a coherent expression of dynastic power, religious identity, and political ambition. Their influence helped shape the tastes and cultural practices of their times, leaving a legacy that extended well beyond their lifetimes. Through their support of artists, musicians, architects, and performers, these royal women helped define the cultural contours of early modern Britain and Protestant Europe. Their patronage served strategic purposes, supporting religious causes aligned with their beliefs, promoting political alliances, and reinforcing the legitimacy of their rule. At the same time, it allowed these women to assert a degree of agency and influence in societies where direct political power for women was often limited. By cultivating the arts and culture, they created lasting monuments to the Stuart dynasty and ensured their names were remembered not just as political figures, but as vital contributors to the cultural richness of their era. The impact of Elizabeth Stuart, Henrietta Maria, and Queen Anne's patronage was felt in courtly life and beyond, influencing broader trends in European art and culture. Their courts became centers of innovation and tradition, blending the old and new, the sacred and the secular, the political and the aesthetic. This cultural legacy, intertwined with the tumultuous political history of the Stuarts, remains a testament to the subtle yet profound ways in which royal women shaped history. Religious tensions between Protestants and Catholics defined much of the political and social landscape of early modern Europe, profoundly shaping the lives and roles of the Stuart sisters. The divisions were not merely theological, but deeply intertwined with questions of power, legitimacy, and identity. Against this backdrop, the Stuart women emerged not only as members of royal families, but as influential actors in religious diplomacy, often navigating the delicate balance between competing confessions with considerable skill. Their actions contributed to both the perpetuation and the easing of these conflicts, highlighting the complex intersections of faith, politics, and gender during a turbulent period. The Protestant-Catholic divide had been festering for more than a century by the time the Stuart sisters came into prominence, with Europe effectively split along confessional lines. England, Scotland, and parts of the Netherlands and Germany had embraced various forms of Protestantism, while countries like Spain, France, and large parts of Italy and the Holy Roman Empire remained Catholic. These religious allegiances were rarely neutral, they shaped alliances, wars, and the Stuarts, originating from England and Scotland, found themselves at the heart of these tensions, with family members marrying into both Protestant and Catholic dynasties, complicating loyalties and duties. The Stuart sisters, positioned at the crossroads of these religious divides, often played crucial roles as intermediaries. Elizabeth Stuart, for example, married Frederick V, Elector Palatine, a leading Protestant figure whose brief reign as King of Bohemia sparked the 30 Years' War, one of Europe's most devastating religious conflicts. Through her marriage and subsequent exile, Elizabeth became a potent symbol of Protestant resistance and suffering. Yet, she was also deeply involved in fostering connections among Protestant courts, using her position to support diplomatic efforts aimed at preserving and advancing Protestant interests across the continent. Her correspondence and patronage were vital instruments of religious diplomacy. Elizabeth's letters reached monarchs, diplomats, and religious leaders, helping to coordinate political and military support. These networks extended beyond mere politics. They carried cultural and religious messages designed to inspire unity and resilience among Protestants. The personal tone of her communication, often infused with religious fervor, gave her a distinctive voice that transcended conventional diplomatic channels. Similarly, Henrietta and Stuart, the youngest daughter of Charles I, was raised in France and married Philippe, Duke of Orleans, brother to King Louis XIV. This union placed her at the heart of Catholic France's court, a stark contrast to her Protestant English upbringing. Yet, Henrietta and adeptly navigated her dual identities, acting as an unofficial diplomat who facilitated communication and negotiation between England and France. Her role was particularly significant during the peace talks leading to the Peace of Dover in 1670, where secret negotiations were conducted to align the interests of the two countries amid broader European conflicts. Henrietta Anne's influence demonstrates the often underestimated power of royal women in foreign affairs. While they rarely held formal political office, their unique positions allowed them to operate in spaces that were both intimate and public, leveraging family ties, personal relationships, and social gatherings to shape diplomatic outcomes. Her ability to mediate between Protestant England and Catholic France underscores the delicate balance Stuart women maintained between faith and politics. Beyond religious diplomacy, these women also embodied early signs of political feminism, albeit in ways that differed from modern conceptions of the term. They found their voices through correspondence, the hosting of salons, and the cultivation of extensive social and political networks. These activities provided arenas in which women could influence opinion, negotiate power, and advance their causes within the constraints imposed by patriarchal society. Letters were a particularly potent tool. The Stuart sisters and their contemporaries maintained vast epistolary networks that connected courts, intellectuals, and political figures across Europe. These letters were often more than personal communication. They contained political analysis, commentary on events, and strategic advice. Through this medium, women exercised intellectual agency and exerted influence on matters of state, religion, and culture. Their written words helped shape policies and public perceptions, subtly challenging the notion that political power was the exclusive domain of men. Salons, often hosted by women of rank or intellectual prominence, became important venues for cultural and political exchange. These gatherings brought together thinkers, artists, diplomats, and nobles, fostering discussions that could affect the course of policy and opinion. The Stuart women's involvement in such salons connected them to the broader European Enlightenment currents, linking faith, reason, and governance in complex ways. By nurturing these intellectual communities, they contributed to the early formation of feminist ideas, advocating for women's participation in public life through cultural and intellectual means. These networks and gatherings also positioned women as cultural intermediaries between royal courts. Through marriage alliances and social ties, women facilitated the exchange of ideas, customs, and fashions, acting as conduits of influence across national and confessional borders. Their roles often went unrecorded in official histories, yet they were vital in maintaining diplomatic relations and promoting cultural understanding in an era marked by division and conflict. The intersection of faith, feminism, and foreign affairs in the lives of the Stuart sisters highlights the complexity of their contributions. They operated within a framework that limited their formal authority, but allowed them to exercise power in more nuanced and indirect ways. Their religious identities informed their political actions, and their gender shaped the methods by which they engaged with the world. These women's lives illustrate how religious conviction could inspire political activism and diplomacy, particularly in an age when confessional allegiance was central to state identity. At the same time, their navigation of court politics, personal relationships, and social networks reveals an emerging form of female agency that laid early groundwork for feminist thought. Their cultural patronage and intellectual engagement contributed to shaping the political and religious discourse of their times. The legacy of the Stuart sisters in these realms is significant. They demonstrate how women, often marginalized in formal power structures, found ways to assert influence and shape history. Through faith, they connected disparate political entities. Through cultural engagement, they fostered intellectual exchange. And through diplomacy, they helped navigate the turbulent waters of European politics. Their stories enrich our understanding of the multifaceted roles royal women played in early modern Europe, challenging simplistic narratives of female passivity and highlighting their integral contributions to the era's defining conflicts and transformations. In recent decades, there has been a significant shift in how historians and scholars approach the lives and legacies of the Stuart sisters. For a long time, these royal women were overshadowed by their male counterparts in traditional historical narratives, often relegated to the sidelines as mere wives, daughters, or pawns in dynastic games. However, modern historiography has moved toward a more nuanced and comprehensive reevaluation of their roles, recognizing the complex ways in which they exercised influence, navigated power structures, and shaped the course of European history. This renewed scholarly attention not only restores their place in history, but also invites broader reflections on the intersections of gender, politics, and monarchy. One key aspect of this historiographical shift is the focus on agency. Earlier histories often depicted the Stuart sisters as passive figures caught in the tumultuous events of their times, but recent scholarship highlights their active participation in political, religious, and cultural affairs. Through letters, patronage, diplomatic endeavors, and courtly influence, these women demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of power and strategy. Modern historians emphasize the importance of their networks, both familial and political, and how these were crucial in shaping alliances and conflicts. By examining personal correspondence and contemporary accounts with fresh eyes, scholars reveal the sisters as shrewd negotiators and cultural intermediaries who wielded soft power effectively. This reevaluation is also tied to a broader trend in historical studies that seeks to recover the stories of women previously marginalized in mainstream history. The Stuart sisters serve as compelling case studies in exploring how royal women balanced the constraints imposed by their gender with their ambitions and responsibilities. Their lives shed light on the limits and possibilities of female power within patriarchal monarchies, challenging assumptions about passivity and dependency. Such scholarship contributes to a richer, more inclusive understanding of the past that values diverse experiences and voices. Beyond academic circles, the stories of the Stuart sisters have gained renewed visibility in popular culture, including film, literature, and media. Their dramatic lives, marked by exile, political intrigue, religious conflict, and personal tragedy, offer fertile ground for storytelling that resonates with contemporary audiences. Films and television series have begun to depict these women with greater depth and complexity, moving away from simplistic portrayals to explore their intelligence, resilience, and influence. Novels and biographies written for a general readership often focus on their personal struggles and triumphs, humanizing historical figures who might otherwise seem distant and inaccessible. These cultural representations play an important role in shaping public perceptions of the Stuart sisters and, by extension, the historical period in which they lived. By bringing their stories to life, they make history tangible and relatable, inspiring interest in the broader themes of monarchy, power, and gender. While artistic interpretations sometimes take liberties with historical facts, they nonetheless contribute to an ongoing dialogue about the significance of these women and encourage audiences to engage critically with history. Genealogical interest has also fueled contemporary fascination with the Stuart sisters. As descendants of the Stuarts and related European royal houses seek to trace their lineage, these women emerge as key figures connecting various royal lines across the continent. The complexities of their marriages and offspring illuminate the intricate web of dynastic politics that shaped Europe's royal families. This genealogical focus often intersects with cultural heritage and identity, highlighting how the legacies of the Stuart sisters continue to influence notions of nobility, legitimacy, and succession. Feminist scholarship further enriches this reclamation of the Stuart sisters by situating their experiences within broader discussions about women's roles in history and society. Their stories exemplify the challenges women faced in navigating systems designed to limit their authority and the creative ways they found to assert themselves. Feminist historians analyze how these women negotiated power through familial relationships, religious affiliation, and cultural patronage, offering insights into the gender dynamics of their time. Moreover, by foregrounding their contributions, feminist scholarship challenges the male-centric focus of traditional history and promotes a more balanced understanding of the past. Understanding the legacies of the Stuart sisters matters because it deepens our comprehension of monarchy and female power, both historically and in contemporary terms. Their lives illustrate how queens, princesses, and noble women were not simply decorative figures, but active participants in the political and cultural arenas. They shaped policies, influenced religious conflicts, and facilitated diplomatic negotiations, often with lasting impact. Recognizing their roles complicates simplistic narratives of monarchy as an exclusively male domain and highlights the gendered nature of power. Their stories also offer valuable lessons about resilience, adaptability, and agency in the face of adversity. The Stuart sisters often contended with exile, political upheaval, and personal loss, yet they used these challenges to redefine their identities and roles. Their ability to maneuver within and beyond courtly confines reveals the fluidity and complexity of power structures. Such examples resonate today as societies continue to grapple with questions of gender equality and the representation of women in leadership. In addition, the Stuart sisters' lives remind us of the importance of historical memory and how it is constructed. The ways in which their stories have been told and retold reflect changing attitudes toward gender, authority, and history itself. Reclaiming their narratives is part of a broader effort to democratize history, making it more inclusive and reflective of diverse experiences. This process encourages ongoing critical inquiry and challenges us to reconsider whose stories are told and valued. The modern reclamation of the Stuart sisters involves a dynamic interplay between scholarship, culture, genealogy, and feminist thought. It transforms them from peripheral figures into central actors whose lives illuminate the complexities of monarchy, religion, and female power in early modern Europe. Their legacies endure not only in historical records but also in contemporary conversations about gender and authority, reminding us that history is always a work in progress, one that benefits from revisiting and revising the stories of those who shaped it in profound yet often unacknowledged ways. The Stuart sisters, though often overshadowed by the more visible actions of kings and male rulers, played a critical and multifaceted role in shaping the political, religious, and cultural landscapes of their time. Their influence extended far beyond the traditional boundaries assigned to royal women, weaving through the corridors of diplomacy, the complexities of religious conflict, and the subtle workings of court politics. While they may not have wielded overt monarchical power in the same way as reigning kings, their soft power, the ability to influence through relationships, patronage, and personal diplomacy, was profound and enduring. The legacy of the Stuart sisters reveals the importance of recognizing these often hidden channels of power and understanding how female agency contributed to the formation of dynasties and the ideological foundations of future queens. Throughout their lives, the Stuart sisters were engaged in diplomatic efforts that helped shape alliances and political relationships not only within Britain but across Europe. Whether through marriage, correspondence, or personal negotiation, they acted as vital intermediaries between courts, influencing policies and easing tensions in times of conflict. Their roles as cultural and religious intermediaries helped to bridge divides, particularly during an era marked by intense Protestant-Catholic conflict. Their involvement in religious diplomacy underscored the intersection between faith and politics, as they sought to negotiate peace or support causes aligned with their beliefs, often at great personal risk. This diplomatic work, carried out largely behind the scenes, was essential in maintaining the delicate balance of power in Europe during turbulent times. In the realm of religion, the Stuart sisters' influence was particularly significant. Many of them embodied the religious tensions of the period, being caught between Protestant and Catholic factions, yet they also used their positions to advance their faiths and promote tolerance or strategic alliances. Their patronage of religious institutions and engagement in theological debates reflected the deep intertwining of religion and monarchy during the early modern period. Through their faith and piety, these women shaped religious culture and policy, contributing to the ideological underpinnings of the Stuart dynasty. Their religious positions were not simply private matters, but carried political weight, affecting the allegiances of supporters and the strategies of ruling monarchs. Politically, while the Stuart sisters did not often hold official power, their influence in court politics was undeniable. They operated within and around the formal structures of monarchy to assert their interests and protect their families. Their ability to act as confidants, advisors, and patrons allowed them to impact decision-making processes and succession issues. In times of crisis, such as during civil wars, exile, or contested successions, they became crucial figures who managed alliances and kept dynastic hopes alive. Their political involvement demonstrated that power could be exercised in diverse forms, not limited to kingship or official titles. This form of influence, though less visible, was often more flexible and enduring because it relied on personal relationships and networks rather than formal authority. Culturally, the Stuart sisters were patrons of the arts, literature, and science, fostering intellectual and artistic movements within their courts and beyond. Their support of theater, music, and philosophy contributed to the flourishing of culture during their era and helped establish courts as centers of learning and creativity. By promoting cultural patronage, they enhanced their family's prestige and reinforced the legitimacy of the Stuart monarchy. Their engagement with prominent thinkers and artists also connected them to the wider European Enlightenment, positioning them as figures who bridged traditional monarchy and emerging modern ideas. The concept of soft power best captures the enduring legacy of the Stuart sisters. Unlike kings who wielded sword and scepter, these women used influence that was relational, cultural, and symbolic. Their power was often exercised through persuasion, alliance building, and cultural leadership rather than force. This soft power allowed them to navigate patriarchal constraints and assert themselves in meaningful ways that shaped history. It also laid the groundwork for future queens who would expand the possibilities of female rulership, demonstrating that effective power could take multiple forms. Dynastically, the Stuart sisters were instrumental in securing the future of their house and the monarchy at large. Through strategic marriages and the upbringing of heirs, they connected the Stuarts to other European royal families, ensuring alliances that would have lasting political and cultural effects. Their children and descendants occupied thrones across Europe, spreading Stuart influence far beyond Britain's borders. Moreover, their ideological contributions, whether through religious patronage, cultural promotion, or political negotiation, helped shape the principles and policies that future monarchs would inherit. In this way, they contributed not only to the survival but also to the transformation of monarchy during a period of profound change. Reflecting on their legacy, it becomes clear that history has often overlooked these women, not because their influence was insignificant, but because the traditional focus on male-dominated narratives obscured the more subtle forms of female power. Yet, while history may neglect or marginalize, it cannot erase true influence. The lives and actions of the Stuart sisters continue to resonate, reminding us that power takes many shapes and that women have always been central to the political and cultural fabric of their times. Their stories challenge us to broaden our understanding of history to include the diverse and complex roles played by women. They encourage a re-examination of how influence is measured and valued, pushing against narrow definitions of authority based solely on titles and official positions. By reclaiming the narratives of the Stuart sisters, historians and scholars illuminate the hidden dimensions of monarchy and contribute to a richer, more inclusive historical memory. Ultimately, the legacy of the Stuart sisters is a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the enduring impact of female agency. Their ability to wield influence through diplomacy, religion, politics, and culture reveals the depth and breadth of their power. They were not simply passive figures in the background, but active architects of their family's destiny and the political landscape of their time. This recognition enriches our understanding of the past and inspires contemporary reflections on the nature of power, leadership, and gender. The story of the Stuart sisters is one of hidden influence brought to light, of subtle power that shaped history in lasting ways. Their lives remind us that true authority often lies beneath the surface, in the relationships, ideas, and cultural endeavors that sustain societies. As we continue to uncover and appreciate their contributions, we affirm that the legacies of these remarkable women are not only historical footnotes, but vital chapters in the ongoing story of monarchy and female power.